All right, everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil, and today we're going to be talking about Zetas, and we're going to be looking at 5, if you want to call them, core teams, player-friendly teams, and their Zeta, needs. This is kind of stemming off of the video I put out, I don't know, a little over a week ago, where we talked about the player-friendly non-galactic legend teams and which ones I kind of found to be the most helpful. So we're going to be breaking down some of those teams and their Zetas. The teams in this list are a little bit older, right? They've been in the game for a while, and we will be then releasing the teams that I mentioned that are newer, because I think some of the older teams have Zetas that are much more you could consider luxury or not necessary, where I think a lot of newer teams, their Zetas are a much greater part of their purpose. They're a much greater benefit, and so you need to it's a little bit harder to break down the newer teams, because some of them it's just like, yeah, you need them all, suck it up. But in these older teams, it is a little bit easier, so we're going to be breaking that down for you guys today. Let's give a huge shout to the channel members for their continued support first. If you're ever interested in joining, that link is below, along with a link to our Discord server. I just cannot thank these folks enough for everything they've done, whether it's, you see it or you don't. Really appreciate all of you guys just keeping the faith and believing in me. If you guys are ever interested in just kind of, asking these people, hey, is Phil actually good at what he does? I'm sure they would say no. No. They're all great people. I'm humbled and honored and blessed to be able to do this for you guys. So let's get in here and let's talk about some Zetas. All right, folks, so we're going to start with a team that I'd say I know inside and out, and that is the Commander Luke Skywalker team. This team right here is one that I love. I know them pretty darn well, and I have a good idea of which Zetas they do and don't want. So we're going to start with Han Solo, and that's on shoots first. You absolutely need this Zeta. 10% critical chance, and the first time each turn Han uses his basic, he attacks again, dealing 50% less damage. That is so crucial. And what a lot of people will say is, oh, well, like the 50% less damage. One, what you've got to think is when combined with a character like C-3PO, where whenever a Rebel or Ewok uses their basic, they inflict expose on target enemy for 2 turns, right? Which can't be evaded. So think Han using his basic, every single time he does that, he's going to attack again, right? Every time he does that, right, the first time each turn Han uses his basic, he attacks again, you're inflicting expose. So he's going to get expose, and then he's going to hit that second expose with the attack that's dealing 50% less damage. Also bear in mind, if the target has less than 50% turn meter, deal 75% more damage. Otherwise, remove 35% turn meter. This attack can't be evaded. I wanted to bring this up particularly with him because the mechanics here are, Han's going to use his basic first. If you have over 50% turn meter, he's going to remove 35%, which means he's going to use his basic again now with that Zeta, but it's going to deal 75% more damage. So that second time, it could actually deal more damage than your initial attempt at damage, and you're going to be hitting an expose. So that Zeta really, really ramps well with this ability where you can either, remove turn meter and then deal extra damage. You could remove turn meter twice, depending how much they have. Like, it is so good. So that's a great Zeta. You really want that one. And then CLS himself. This is tough because as much as people want to chintz out, you really do want all the Zetas. I would say the first one you want is it binds all things. Whenever Luke resists a detrimental effect, he recovers 5% protection, and whenever Luke inflicts a debuff, he gains 10% turn meter, and other allies gain half that amount. I would say this is the first one I would equip, followed very quickly by Learn Control. While Luke doesn't have call to action, he has 50% crit avoid and 100% tenacity. That is very important to his kit. That 100% tenacity, do not discount that, especially when you combine it with extra tenacity. Luke basically can't be debuffed when he is outside of call to action. But Rebel maneuvers the leadership. This one was slept on for a long time, but whenever an enemy resists a detrimental effect, Rebel allies gain 5% turn meter. Now, why this is important is you think with it binds all things, when Luke inflicts a debuff, he gains turn meter and allies gain half that amount. And then in Rebel maneuvers, whenever an enemy resists, Rebel allies gain 5%. So on Luke's turn, just looking at Luke specifically, he inflicts debuffs, allies gain turn meter. and he gains turn meter. With the leadership, if those debuffs get resisted, everyone's gaining turn meter. The one thing with the leader, the one thing I say with binds all things, the reason it does go first is because of the, whenever he resists a detrimental effect, he recovers protection, which combined with learn control is just so crazy. And you could argue these two back and forth. I think a lot of it depends on what you're trying to counter, but rebel maneuvers for me still extremely important to kind of help really keep that turn meter train going, particularly when it's not his turn, because there's other effects that the rebel allies can be putting out there, and if you're gaining that turn meter because they're resisting, then it's fine. So yeah, we're gonna go with those Zetas. Now, loyal friend on Chewbacca is absolutely required, right? Don't really need to deal much more there, right? When he deals damage, Chewbacca and all other guarded allies recover 3% health and protection. Raging Wookiee is nice, but not necessary. It's just one of those Zetas that I think is good, but it's not great, right? You don't really need it. It's kind of situational. Like if you're not facing a team that can increase your cooldowns or put ability block, then this is pointless. And then 3PO and Chewie, I've kind of got here. If I'm being honest, this Zeta is far more valuable in PvE content than PvP, simply because most of the time the CLS team will absolutely decimate the enemy before you'd really get a lot of benefit from dealing extra damage for dead enemies. But I can't lie and say that it's not helpful for this team, because there are times where I've completely needed this Zeta. So, to be tough but honest, it is, I can't say it's luxury, it is good. C-3PO has two of them. I think the first one is here on, oh my goodness, inflict confuse twice on target enemy. You don't really need to do that. It's not that it isn't nice, but it's a luxury Zeta. And similarly with, I think it's, where is it at here? Wait for me. At the start of the encounter, C-3PO and R2-D2 gain translation. I don't think it's necessary. Neither of those are needed for him. Are they, there's luxury Zetas. Your team will be better if you have them, but you don't need it for this team to do what it does, right? You really don't need this to do what it does. And, to be as honest or as transparent as possible, if you have Luke, Han, and Chewbacca, the loyal friend Zeta, you're going to be fine. 3PO and Chewie, a great one to add. The other ones, not really necessary. Let's move on to the Darth Traya team, right? So the Darth Traya team, what we will say is you'll want all of these Zetas on Traya and Talon. Savage's Zeta is required if we are to, how would I phrase this? Those Zetas are required if you're going to put the Omicron on Savage. If you're not going to put the Omicron on Savage, then you don't need that Zeta. You can move on with your life, right? I'm okay with that. Darth Sion is none with the asterisks. If you're really only going to use this team in GAC, you don't need this Zeta, because the pain is really about getting taunt on him and getting held by hatred. And if you're running the Savage Zeta, he's the one you want taunting. You normally don't want Sion taunting while Savage is in the team, right? So I think that's kind of expected. If you are going to be using this team outside of PvP, if you're going to be using it in other game modes, then you do want this one on Sion. So that's why I say none with the asterisks. It all depends on what you're trying to get out of this team and what you're trying to do, right? So I think that's, that can be acceptable, you could say, right? The next team I would throw, the next character here is Darth Nihilus. Here's the thing. You don't need either. You don't need the leadership because you're not going to use him in the lead. And you're not going to need Lord of Hunger because is it nice to have? Sure, but I don't think you need it for this team to do what it does. You're going to be fine with the team as it operates. Can it help you? Absolutely. But again, I don't think it's one that I'm looking at and saying, if you don't have this, you guys are done for. It's just not accurate. Next, we have the 501st. So with General Skywalker, Rex, and Fives, you are going to want all of their Zetas. I know there are a lot of you who are probably screaming at me in the comments saying, Phil, you don't know what you're talking about. General Skywalker doesn't need every single Zeta. Here's the way I would say that, right? General Skywalker needs these Zetas to operate at peak at the peak of his powers. Without some of the Zetas, there are teams he will struggle against. The most important one is absolutely Hero with No Fear. This is the most important Zeta on the team here. General Skywalker has a 100% counter chance, 50% critical chance if all allies are 5-0 first. That is, you need that, right? That's duh. Next, I would go with the leadership. When an enemy gains a buff, all 5-0 first allies gain 2% offense. That is what allows you to beat a lot of those teams where they're gaining a lot of buffs and all of a sudden General Skywalker starts hitting like a truck. It's because of the leadership. It does make a huge difference. There are teams that he would not be able to beat if he didn't have this Zeta. The Chosen One is the next one I would go with here. If the target has no protection when General Skywalker uses an ability, reduce their max health by 20% for the rest of battle, excluding raid bosses which can't be resisted. Do not underestimate how important that ability is, because this is on his unique. So that's not tied to his leadership, right? So even when you're using General Skywalker on a Jedi team or something, someone doesn't have protection, he can reduce their max health by 20%. That becomes extremely important when you think about some of those characters who can ramp their max health like crazy. General Skywalker is going to be able to reduce that if they don't have protection. And then on the basic here, if this is the first ability General Skywalker uses, he immediately uses special ability Telekinesis. Now, a lot of players will say, oh, you don't want this because telekinesis can be evaded and the basic can't, and there's some truth to that. But the thing with telekinesis is right in here where it says, if possible, this attack will critically hit enemies with armor shred. When General Skywalker critically hits, he'll increase cooldowns, so that's kind of nice. If the target enemy is dazed, reduce General Skywalker's ability cooldowns by 1. That is the big part of this. General Skywalker with Force Grip can daze the enemy, right? Deal physical damage, daze them for 2 turns. If possible, this attack will critically hit enemies with Armor Shred, right? So you want Armor Shred, right? Daze. But being able to reduce your cooldowns with the telekinesis on someone with daze is incredible. That, well worth it. For Rex, getting the cooldown reduction, that is, 501st Clone Troopers. This is so important, right? That is really important. 5s. You've got Domino Squad, which is the gaining turn meter whenever a Clone Trooper 501st takes damage, and half that amount for other allies. You want that. That helps General Skywalker stand up faster from his naps. And Tactical Awareness is the sacrifice. If 5s is defeated, the 501st gain max health, protection, speed, offense until the end of battle. You absolutely want to go Tactical Awareness and then Domino Squad for 5s. That's kind of the way I would go there. With Echo and ARC Trooper, I'm putting these guys in the luxury category. Echo's a little bit higher on the list as a luxury. Whenever an enemy evades from a Clone Trooper or 501st ally, he deals damage equal to 20% of their max health, which can't be evaded. That is nice, but again, only if Foresight or Dodge is present, and there's a lot of teams that don't have those, so it's nice to have, but it's not necessary. And then ARC Trooper, the blaster turret will assist when ARC Trooper attacks at a turn. While he does have a 35% counter chance, you're not going to get that often enough, because General Skywalker's normally the one taunting. And then while 5s can call people to assist, you're normally going to want to call General Skywalker anyway. And when General Skywalker's taking a nap, if you're calling ARC Trooper, then 5s is going to start taunting, and we don't want 5s to taunt. So is it nice? It's a luxury. In the Shock T team, you can call ARC Trooper to assist a lot more, and it makes sense. But because in this team, he doesn't get called to assist, doesn't attack out of turn a lot, not as completely necessary. Next is the Darth Malgus Sith Empire team. You are going to want all of the Zetas on Malak and all of them on Darth Malgus. On Malgus, the one is the Zeta, or the basic. On the second attack, right? So it's deal physical damage with a 50% chance to attack again, right? Doubled if the target is Jedi. On the second attack, Malgus gains 20% max health stacking until the end of the encounter. These attacks can't be countered or evaded. Sith Empire allies gain crit damage up, right? So that crit damage up is always there, but it can't be evaded or countered is huge. Gaining max health, also a big deal, and that's because on the special here, deal true damage to target enemy equal to 40% of his max health, so this will get more and more powerful throughout battle. If he's in the leader slot, the doubt can't be resisted. Increase target cooldowns by 1, which can't be resisted. Darth Malgus gains protection up for each debuff. Yeah. You want those 2 Zetas. They are necessary for the performance of that team. Then on Darth Malak, they're on his uniques. Again, I don't need to go crazy, but enemies who inflicted damage over time or critically hit him are inflicted with fear. Duh, that's what makes Malak so annoying. And then add the first time Malak reaches each of these thresholds, he gains a bonus turn and the cooldown of Drain of Life is set. Duh. Need both of those Zetas. Darth Revan is next, and there's an asterisk on the leadership here. He has a leadership Zeta. If you're never going to use him in the leadership, probably don't need the Zeta because you're going to use him under the Malgus lead. It is a very nice Zeta to have. However, it is one of those situations where only certain teams can remove turn meter. Not everybody has that. And listen, at the end of the day, is this helpful in the lead? Yes. But if you're not going to use him in the lead, it doesn't matter, right? That's kind of the way to phrase that. On Conqueror, enemies can assist or attack again. Yes, you want that when it's targeting Darth Revan. That is actually more important than the health equalization. Because while the health equalization is nice, right? If I can assist and attack again, I can still delete Darth Revan, no problem, right? This is huge. And it's not just, assist, it's or attack again. So Han Solo can't use his basic twice, right? Bo-Katan, if she's using her basic, only 1 time. So that is a very important Zeta there. And then along with Villain, the health equalization it ends up making him survive for forever. Bastila Shan is on her unique. This is a luxury in my opinion. It's adding extra potency and you gain foresight for 1 turn at the start of battle. If it was gaining foresight every single time at the start of her turn, she gains foresight and so does the leader, this would be a lot better. But just for an extra 50% potency in the foresight, not worth a Zeta. That's a huge luxury in this game. There are far better ones that you can equip. And then there's no Zetas on Sith Marauder, Sith Assassin, or Sith Empire Trooper. So you're kind of good here, right? So all of a sudden, you look at this and you're like, wow, there's a lot of Zetas. You start whittling them down and you're like, hey, you know what? It's a little bit more manageable because I don't need them on these guys. Finally, we're getting to the Inquisitors. For Reva and Third Sister, don't be cheap. You want them all, right? Even for, you could say, oh, are they that important? Reva, if she's at full health on the special one here, inflict armor shred, that's important because there are certain teams where that armor shred plays a factor for a long time in the battle. The reckless sweep, the Zeta here is if all enemies had at least 1 stack of purge, inflict defense down and healing immunity for 2 turns, which can't be dispelled or resisted, and Inquisitorious allies gain 20% turn meter. Yes, you need this. This makes a lot of fights go a lot faster. It can stop a lot of those teams that maybe would otherwise just blow through the Inquisitors. This is a huge ability. And then finally, on the leadership, what else is there to say? You need the leadership ability here. Start of the encounter, or whenever Inquisitorious allies defeated or defeats an enemy, all enemies are inflicted with 5 stacks of purge, max 6, which can't be resisted. So yeah. You want the leadership. You're going to use her in the lead all the time, and it unlocks her best Omicron for Grand Arena. Seventh Sister is next, and you do want this Zeta, right? All allies recover 10% health and protection, right? So it's adding extra health and protection, right? So add, 10% health and protection and gain evasion up for 2 turns if target allies Inquisitorious reduce this ability's cooldown by 1. That's huge. All of a sudden, this is going from a 4-turn cooldown to a 3-turn cooldown, and it's going to get spammed. And remember that Seventh Sister, where is it at here? Is it in Patience? Whenever another ally is critically hit by an enemy, this character has a 20% chance to gain 100% turn meter. So there's a lot of opportunity where she's going to be reducing cooldowns, and her own cooldowns and taking extra turns, and all of a sudden she's spamming this ability, and it just gets really, really annoying. Grand Inquisitor is next. You want both of his Zetas, but there's an asterisk here. There is an asterisk on the leadership. This leadership is extremely important because he's the leader for when you're going and doing the Reva unlock mission on Tatooine. The thing I'll say here is that this Zeta, if you get the Merrick Omicron, you probably don't need the Zeta. You're going to be okay without that Zeta. So if you're willing to invest in the Merrick Omicron, Grand Inquisitor's Leadership Zeta, not as important. If you're not going to invest in the Merrick Omicron, then equip the Grand Inquisitor Zeta and move on with life. It kind of sucks because you're like, oh, like, you know, once you get, you know, because you are forced to use him in the leadership, which is the problem, and you're going to do that 2 times a month, every single TB, like, you know, and he is a pilot, so it does help make this scythe better. Again, I'm playing that advocate of some of you might have more Omicrons available than Zetas, and if you were to go get Merrick, then you could save yourself a Zeta. Next, we have 5th Brother and 8th Brother, and they are nice to have. I can't say they're luxury. They're nice to have. On 5th Brother, it is this one here. 30% extra damage, good. If target had at least 3 stacks of Purge, gain damage immunity for 1 turn. That is really, really nice. Stun target for 1 turn, and if target enemy was Jedi, inflict fear on all non-Jedi enemies for 1 turn, which can't be copied, dispelled, evaded, or resisted. That second part of it's a little bit harder because it depends on the team that you are going up against, but think about fighting the Jedi Master Kenobi team. If you go and fear General Kenobi, or you go and, you know, use this on General Kenobi, Commander Tano is going to be feared. So this, you know, Padme would get feared. Padme can't be feared, but Commander Tano would get feared. That is really, really nice to have. Then 8th Brother, it's on the special. 50% extra damage is huge. 5 stacks consumed, inflict armor shred. The armor shred here is nice, but it's kind of like, well, I'm probably just going to end up deleting the character that I use this on anyway. So, like, it's kind of one of those where, like, the armor shred is, okay, you went after somebody with way more health and protection than necessary. Because I like this more so for the damage than the armor shred, because you're going to kill them a lot faster. 9th Sister, the ground pound, inflict daze and potency down, can't be resisted by Jedi. It's not really necessary. For the way that most of us use her, you don't need that Zeta. You know, it's a nice one to have. You don't need it. Most of the time now with that I have Reva, I'm using her with like unaligned Force users. I used her with Lord Vader for a while. That daze is extremely helpful, but it's not necessary for what I really need her to do, which is just sit there and tank. And then finally, 2nd Sister, guys, the last one on this list. The big thing here, it's on everyone is expendable. It gives her extra speed, defense, pen, and critical damage as, you know, enemies or Empire allies are defeated. You don't use her with the Inquisitors. You're only using it to juice up the TIE Interceptor ship, which is, in some fights, that's completely necessary. In other fights, it doesn't matter because this thing doesn't even leave the reinforcement slot. You're just using it for that unique ability. So, you know, not really necessary for how most of you are going to end up using 2nd Sister. So, guys, that walks you through these 5 teams and the Zetas that I would rank on them. I hope this is helpful. I hope this kind of gives you a framework to use and help you move forward in the game. Again, I'm not the, you know, as Zareth always says, right? I'm not the sole arbiter of truth. There's a lot of ways to go about Zetas in this game. There's a lot of ways. These are the teams that I'm like extremely familiar with, which Zetas you do and don't need. I will be continuing on with this with the newer teams in the game. I'm just going to be kind of maybe, brutally honest with you. There are some teams where the Zetas are required and you just have to suck it up. But there are some teams, I will say, there are some newer teams that have come out where there are some Zetas that we can potentially skip or not equip because they don't really benefit the team in the way that you would need to or want to. So, that's the end of the video, folks. Like, subscribe, comment. I love you all. May the Force be with you, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, my friends.